Water. 水.
This is Janna from the UK, and this is her best friend Aisha, who is half Japanese. Until today, these two have only ever spoken in English.
発音はどうですか？発音はどうですか？初めの年に日本語を勉強して始めました。
This is the amazing story of Janna from the UK, who spent 6 months learning Japanese to surprise her best friend.
I can't. Dude, are you actually joking?
Now I know there are a lot of videos around the internet with people shocking various people in various languages, but this is a genuine case of shocking somebody. But what's more important than the shock is the story behind it, and this is something that I think every language learner should hear about.
So obviously I'm not at a native level in Japanese, but I had enough to have that conversation with her, and it's probably the best thing I've ever done in my whole life.
Now, language learning on YouTube often gets objectified, and people get into heated arguments about how language learning is portrayed and how it should be portrayed. But what you're going to see in this story is, for me, what language learning should be. It is deeply meaningful, not just for the person involved in their life, but for the people directly around them.
I'm probably one of the most average people you'll ever meet, and I was able to do it because of things that other people put in place for me.
In this video, you'll learn 3 things. You'll learn what's possible in only 6 months, even with a very difficult language. You'll learn the 2 key secrets that Janna used to find success in her Japanese project. And you'll also learn how you can either do this yourself or draw huge amounts of inspiration from it for your own learning project. Now, at the root of Janna's project to learn Japanese is a deep affection for her best friend Aisha. So Aisha must be quite special in order to carve out 6 months from that busy schedule to actually learn her language.
Well, I've known her for quite a while. Just like the sweetest, kindest person I've ever met. And we bonded over a mutual hatred of Latin. So we were in the same Latin class, and we both got pulled up because our grades were so bad and ended up kind of crying outside the Latin classroom together.
So this is the first big lesson of this video. People with a why always do very well, but if you can combine this why with a clear, tangible goal, then you really do have an explosive combination of the motivation to learn in the first place, plus something very clear to aim for and to organize your study around. And so this is something to think about in your own learning. Maybe you are just learning a language for general interest, but if you can manufacture a goal of some kind, maybe it's giving a speech at a wedding reception, maybe it's releasing a YouTube video like this, then this can be one of the fastest ways to focus your efforts and actually speed up your learning.
But she's very special, very, very special to me. I think it just sort of aligned. And I knew obviously she speaks Japanese at home. I was like, this would just be the coolest thing ever. I decided to go for it.
So you decide to learn Japanese, fantastic, but why 6 months?
I mentioned she's really busy as a medic student. She basically was going to go back on her placement in a hospital, maybe 2 months later, and I had a week sort of to see her.
The whole reason that I met Janna in the first place is because she was a student on one of my story learning courses. In fact, she chose story learning, the Japanese course, to start learning Japanese at the beginning from day one when she knew nothing. And so what you're going to hear next is about her experience learning in that way through stories. But I don't want you to fixate on this particular course. Someone like Janna, she would have found success with whatever method she chose. But what's interesting is to listen to how she describes the process of learning through input, as opposed to the traditional methods that a lot of people use, especially with a language like Japanese, where it tends to get taught in a very formal, old-fashioned way.
So you start off not knowing anything, I knew nothing, and it's really crazy to think. I remember listening to chapter 1 still and hearing the word tomodachi and being like, oh, I kind of recognized it because I had read the English at that point, and that was one of the first words I recognized. So you start off like that, not knowing anything, just sort of trying to hear words here and there, understand the sentence structure a little bit more, and then as you progress, you sort of find yourself understanding the gist of what is going on, and you learn more and more words through I guess it's called immersion would be the word for it. You're just immersing yourself in the language. And the way that I did it was not just listen to it, it probably accumulated to hours and hours. And my mom would be like, why do you always have your headphones on? I'd be like, just listening to some Japanese. What's really weird that keeps happening is I just have Japanese in my head all the time because I guess you're listening to it so much. I rarely have a quiet head anymore.
Now the thing about learning through immersion is that you don't get quick results right at the beginning. In fact, sometimes you can feel a little bit lost at the beginning because you're kind of in at the deep end. But what happens is, through the quantity of material that you end up listening to and reading, your brain slowly starts to transform itself and almost create a new identity in the language as it starts to get used to the way that the language works.
I had the conversation in my head and I was like, well, I'd like to go to sleep now, but I've got Japanese in my head. So it really becomes a huge part of your life, I think. which is why it's so good.
Learning through immersion is quite different from traditional learning in that you have to kind of take it on faith that you're learning. It's a little bit like a journey, like traveling by plane, where you kind of know where the destination is, but you can't actually see the path that you're taking. And yet you can see from 30,000 feet when you look out the window that you're traveling generally in the right direction.
So how I would start is just listen, maybe up to 10 times, and then I would introduce the English. And kind of what happens then is you know what's happening from context, because you can easily remember an English story, right? That's only like a page long. That's not difficult. You can remember what's happening. And then because you have that in your head, you've got the context of the story, the background, you know what kind of vocab, you know kind of the sentences, how they're going. You then are listening on repeat constantly. So your brain just sort of matches up words and matches up sentences.
I know that when we tell language stories like this, it can all seem, with hindsight, like a kind of like a foregone conclusion, like it was all really easy and all you have to do is turn up. But that is not the case. There's just that same kind of messy middle, that same confusion that there is, whatever approach you take to learning a language. That is all kind of priced in to an immersion-based method just as much as anything else.
Yeah, Japanese word order is extremely different to English. I've noticed with language learning, at the beginning, you always start with something you want to say in English and you translate it and you have to say that, kind of do that process really quickly. I guess there are just concepts that don't really exist. Those concepts are very difficult, and I struggled knowing do I just move on because it's difficult and I'll get it by just immersing myself if I go to Japan at some point, or do I wait and try and really figure out like an algebra problem, like I actually sit and try and solve it. And I decided to move on because I didn't have time.
When you come across a new difficult concept in a language, like a new grammar point or something, do you sit there, try to solve the grammar problem like an algebra problem, which is what most people do, or do you move on and just say, I'll come back to this later? What Janna did very well is she's willing to say, look, I'm just going to move on. I'm going to put this to one side for a minute. I'm going to move on. Because what happens when you do that is you get exposure to other things. You learn about other things. Your general awareness and knowledge of the language, your general level rises until you get to a point where you can come back to that difficult stuff, and now you're ready because you've got the general wherewithal, the general consciousness and knowledge to be able to understand that stuff more easily. And this is something that traditional learning often doesn't cater for by insisting on, testing you on your grammar, making sure have you learned this concept before we move on to the next thing. Well, that kind of pigeonholes you into something that you might not necessarily be ready for. Whereas with more holistic styles of learning, like learning through immersion, you are able to just take more ownership over the process. And so this is something to think about if you routinely find yourself struggling with grammar concepts. Often the best policy is to move on and come back to it later when you're ready and you've got more weapons in the arsenal. If you want more weapons in your language arsenal, then subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications, because that's what we deal with around here. It's kind of like arms trading for language learners.
The whole reason I even started was to surprise Aisha. So from the get-go, like from January, I knew that this was the aim. So the whole time I've been learning, I have subconsciously sort of been thinking about things that I might say to Aisha. I can remember really early memories of when I started. What would I say to Aisha? So not that I prepared, but that I'd been sort of preparing for the whole 6 months I've been learning.
And this is the value of having a clear goal in your learning. It gives you a filter for choosing what to focus on. If you have no particular goal, then you've got to learn everything in the textbook or everything in the course. But if you know, in Janna's case, that she's going to have to sit down, she knows who she's going to be talking to, then she also knows the kind of things that she's going to be talking about, which allows her to be alert to the kind of words and phrases and grammar that she might need when she finally sits down to speak with Aisha. And this is a very mature attitude that you can actually extend to lots of different areas. So when you travel to the country, then you can start to predict things that you're going to need to say in different situations and learn the stuff that you need for that. And then came the phone call.
I mentioned she's really busy as a medic student, so she basically was going to go back on her placement in a hospital through summer. So yeah, it's a bit crazy. And she was going to come back for a week, maybe 2 months later. And I had a week to see her or schedule into her busy diary, and then she was going to go straight back to university.
So Aisha's coming back from university earlier than expected. She knows she's got this specific time window when she can meet Aisha and show her that all this work she's been doing in Japanese. And so what does she do? Well, true to form, she doubles down, she increases the intensity, and she starts having regular speaking sessions.
So I basically just spent loads of time on italki, about 2 hours a day. So I was scheduled into 1 hour sessions with different teachers. And I did that, and at the same time was trying to speed through the course. I managed to finish, I think, a week before I met her.
Now this time pressure is probably not something you want to put yourself under. You're probably watching this and thinking, well, that all sounds like a little bit too much pressure. And of course there's no reason you need to do that. It's perfectly fine to do these kind of projects over a much longer time frame. But it does go to show how having not only a specific goal, but a goal that is time bound can serve to really focus you and just help you achieve the goals you set out to achieve.
That was 2 hours a day, but I think it was literally maybe like, I want to say 6 weeks, and then for another week and a half I did 1 hour a day because I literally was not functioning properly.
Learning through immersion, as effective as it may be as a method, it's not enough to get you to speak fluently. You can't just read and listen and then suddenly speak fluently. In order to get good at speaking, you have to speak a lot. It's like a separate part of the process. It involves different skills in your brain and also in your mouth. You've got to learn to process the language that you know. You've got to learn to practice reacting to other people when they're speaking. You've got to train the muscles in your face and in your mouth to actually get the sounds out properly as well. It's a really kind of physical thing. Now, of course, you can do this over a much longer period of time, and most people do, but by having this intense period of speaking Japanese over a period of weeks, what Janna's doing, she's getting herself match fit. She's getting herself to the point where she can actually sit down and have a conversation with someone in Japanese, so that when she does sit down with her friend, it's not the first time she's doing it. She can calm her nerves a little bit and actually get the words out of her mouth.
I can't even tell you how nervous I was. Like the prior maybe month, if I would meet a new teacher, I'd say like, oh, my friend's Japanese and that's why I'm learning. And then I'd say I'm really nervous. Like I was nervous like weeks before. And then the conversation happened, and it was like literally the best thing I've ever done in my whole life.
初めの年に日本語を勉強して始めました。はい。大きな秘密があります。はい。5ヶ月後に勉強し始めました。
Can you see how much this means to Janna to have done something like this? And when I look at this back for someone who's so young and who's done such a great little project here, it's a huge project, a great project with Japanese, but when I look at that, I see, you know what you don't know, you've now got this language to use and to develop and to learn more of for the rest of your life, and it's such a fantastic thing.
1月から今までだけアイシャさんと話したかったので
You can literally talk to me in Japanese, like you can have a conversation with me like, about anything in Japanese.
No, I can't.
Are you actually joking?
To learn a language through stories, you should follow the method that I explain in this video right here. And to see the original video, the full 20-minute video with Janna and Aisha, is right here.